Welcome to the Beyond Body podcast with your hosts, Mia and Holly. Join us for a sometimes fortnightly podcast
where we explore all things mental health, being a messy human, and how to get the most out of this one precious life.
and all the ridiculous stories in between.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond Body podcast, your fortnightly-ish podcast with Mia and Holly, where we just talk about whatever we want to talk about that fortnight.
I think that's definitely true about the top of the episodes. I go back and I watch them back and I'm like, people didn't know what we were talking about. Is it a literary podcast? Is it an embarrassing stories podcast? What is it this week?
Feeling. I love coming into podcast day. I actually feel like this morning I was like, ooh, giddy. I just really enjoy podcast day.
The only thing is I always make sure I have like cup of tea, cup of coffee. Bought a new coffee machine. Doesn't work.
Oh, I got one as well. Did you get one on like serious sale at Maya?
No.
Oh, okay.
I got it's a DeLonghi, but it's an espresso. I'm not sure, but didn't like it. Was like, oh, yeah, here we go. Press the button. Nothing.
Oh, I got a DeLonghi as well, and I got some I'm like not someone who like seeks out sales, but this was the most beautiful and reduced coffee machine I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But I haven't nailed using mine either. There's definitely a step that I've missed. Like you have to, I don't know what the word is, but there's like some processes you need to do first before you make the coffee. Otherwise it's going to taste crap.
Yes. Yeah. I think that I'm not a coffee connoisseur. Like if I'm not having a fancy pod, I'm having the cheapest instant coffee from the supermarket. There's something about a dirty instant coffee
Yeah,
with
totally.
sugar and some milk.
Honestly, when I traveled overseas, and this is just something my mum like has conditioned me with, it's like take a little bit of like in a Ziploc bag, like your Nescafe with you. So I'm either like absolute like dirt cheap shit instant coffee, or like I'll be spending $8 on a coffee out. Like I don't have a middle ground.
No, I love it. I love it. So low light, highlight. I did have a little peek at your Instagram over the weekend and saw some gorgeous content you popped up. I don't know if that's your highlight, but it certainly looked like a highlight.
It can be a highlight. I feel like I've had a lot of really nice highlights recently. Just some really nice weekends. I went away with a girlfriend on the weekend to the Southern Highlands and we did nothing. Like we literally were both having a nap at 11 a.m. We just made some nice food. My job was like the cooking. Her job was like keeping the fire running the entire time.
Yeah.
And there was like the most beautiful bath and we just both had baths separately at like like don't know like that had to be
I'm actually just imagining two baths sitting next to each other.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that glam.
Twin beds.
But it was just the best. My decisions for the weekend were, where do I want to read next? What couch do I want to sit on next?
Love that.
And then we just watched movies in the evening and it was the best. It was such a nice highlight. So I think just this change of season, I'm really embracing a colder change of season because I really skipped last winter. So I've gone like 3 summers and I love that. Like I'm a summer girly, don't get me wrong, but also just like I love embracing that slowness. It was just beautiful. What was your highlight meal?
I've had a number of like little highlights. I think I'm just still in that happy pink glow of having just moved down here. It was really rainy. I kind of had a similar experience, but in my house that I live in now, but it still feels like I'm on like a weekender sometimes because we had really blustery, I don't know if you had that where you were, but we had really blustery, cold, like wet weather, which I'm the same. I love it. Like I love a heated blanket on the couch, like comfort movies, and just real proper downtime. And yeah, it feels like I'm holidaying where I live still. I don't really feel like super local just yet.
That's really nice though. First of all, have never heard the word blustering in my entire life. So that's some new vocab for me. And just how nice is it? Comfort movies. You know what movie we watched, which now watching it 10 years later, there's a lot of issues with it. But also was like very comforting. Twilight, like the first 2 movies.
I
Cringe. So funny.
I had arguments with a girlfriend about Twilight because I'm like super feminist. And she was like, I love this. You have to read it. You have to watch it. And I got about 3 pages into the book and I threw it at a wall. And then I watched the movie and I was like, this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. And now I'm going to lecture you, like really full on. But now I'm the same. I go back and I watch them and there's something, it's an era thing. Like I wasn't even a fan. There's something really comforting and nostalgic about them.
Yeah, even just the color grading. I'm like, why is it green? And the
Yes.
soundtrack, and it's just so awkward. But I just couldn't look away from the screen.
Have you watched the other movies?
I don't think I've watched the third or the fourth one.
Please watch them. If
Yeah,
you want to watch a franchise burn itself down, this is the one. Like it just goes camp and off the rails, which I mean,
yeah,
the material they were working with, God help them,
yeah.
but it just completely implodes on itself and it is like a parody of itself. It makes the first one look like an Oscar winner.
Really?
You
Yeah, I'm
have to
gonna watch.
watch them.
Yeah, I'll maybe this weekend. The next rainy weekend, I'll watch them. But gosh, it was good entertainment.
Yes. Low light for me actually is part of the reason why we had to reschedule this because last week I had a huge endo flare up. Got something going on with my left ovary, which is really concerning. But yeah, so we're a week late on this one, but not for you guys because we are still ahead. But I said to her, I was like, how ironic. Need to reschedule this one, the endo women's health episode. But all part of the chronic illness game. We love it. What's been a little low light for you?
Low light for me was probably just yesterday morning. I had just one of those mornings where you're like, I just need to rewind the clock 45 minutes and
Yes.
start again. It hasn't happened to me for ages. I feel like I started the morning very cheery. I mean, I was running late, but I just went to get a coffee in the morning and I like just took a tiny shortcut when I was walking back and there was this tree and there was a signpost.
Yeah.
Walked between them and I wrapped myself in the most intense cobweb anyone has ever walked through in their
Um,
entire life. Like it would have been cooking, it's not the right word, but would have been, developing
I love it. Baking.
like minimum a month or 2 months. Like there
Oh,
was other bugs, there was other spiders. That feeling where you just then feel like something is on you, like
yes.
all the time. Because I have never like ripped off a jumper so quickly. Like it was all in my hair, it was all on my face. It was any poor person who walked past and saw that, like it was absolute chaos. Dropped my
Migraine.
coffee in this process, obviously.
Oh no.
No joke, 10 minutes later, I'm like at the fridge. I'm really into pineapple juice at the moment. Don't ask me why. Anyway, and I know this is a bit gross, but also my house, my rules. And I was literally in the fridge, went to like drink from like, those like liter cartons of, it's like a cardboard kind of carton
Yeah.
of juice. Went to drink from the pineapple juice. Was it pineapple juice? No, it was chicken stock.
Oh,
I
love. Nah, it was stacked against you. That was never going to be a good day.
know. And I was like, the fridge was still open, and this part is disgusting. And I just obviously instantly like spat out what was in my mouth, and
Uh,
it's as if I like sneezed into the fridge. I was like, what is happening on this day? This is just not things that happen to someone normally. So I'd say that like chaotic 45 minutes was a low light.
yeah.
Um, but also we rebuilt. We're okay today. We've had a great morning.
Can't last forever.
I know.
Love it. Love it. Well, on that note, we wanted to come and do this women's health, endo, PMDD, all things, under that umbrella. Obviously, we have our own personal experiences with some of these things, and we're not doctors and we're not medical professionals. So we're really going to be mostly speaking from our lived experience and trying to answer some of the questions you sent across from a recovery perspective. But just keeping in mind, a lot of this is just like our own personal experience with for whole PMDD with me with endometriosis, because there are so many intersections here. We're starting to see so many more people reporting that these can really be major contributors to their eating disorder distress and patterns and behaviors and thoughts, beliefs, etc. And we mentioned that we do this and we got a really, really enthusiastic response. So I think it's really, really needed.
It's actually an area I'm really surprised we haven't spoken about before.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's something we're both very interested in because of our own experiences. But unfortunately, for a lot of people, a lot of the education actually does come from having to figure it out yourself because there's not a huge amount of literature or discourse around how to support ourselves or loved ones who are dealing with health issues that
Yeah.
are then directly in interaction with eating disorder recovery.
Yes. And it can be so complex for people because I will speak to people who have really complex, not just behavioral profiles with their eating disorder, but medical profiles as well, where they're chasing all of these symptoms, their physical symptoms, their eating disorder symptoms, and they're contributing to each other, but you can't quite figure out like where the starting point is. Is it the eating disorder that's exacerbating? Is it this that's exacerbating? So just want to come from a total place of compassion with this one because that is a totally understandable, sense of confusion people experience and, feeling lost, etc. And it can just feel whether even if you are someone who just has endometriosis or something like PMDD, just the journey to figuring out what's going on there with the absence of an eating disorder is so challenging.
Just for both of them, as well as other conditions as well. It's not as if it's congruent across everyone who's suffering from it. It is so individualized of what your experience is going to be as well,
Yeah.
which I mean, doing that and then also doing recovery, there is so many pieces to figure out. So
Yeah,
naturally, it can feel super, super overwhelming.
totally. First question. How was your eating disorder or recovery impacted by PMDD? And then what about life now?
So, PMDD, what it stands for, first of all, if you're not aware, is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is pretty much PMS on steroids, I would
Yeah.
say. My diagnosis of PMDD was actually only a few years back, despite likely having had PMD since early menstruation years. This is, first of all, because it's not very well understood or spoken about. And I actually had to really push for a diagnosis as well and go to multiple doctors. The first kind of attitude that I got back when I asked a GP who was like a, childhood pediatrician, male as well, um, was that it's kind of just like PMS with a bit of extra drama. Like that's kind of this attitude that I was receiving which is really disempowering because it's not PMS. It's incredibly debilitating and can severely disrupt daily life. So ultimately, how it presents for me is most commonly a depressed mood and that feeling of sort of like hopelessness, feeling really overwhelmed. And at times previously as well, it was this feeling of feeling out of control. So I would just have no desire to do anything that would actually make me feel good, which caused a lot of anxiety. My experience is that it just always felt like my emotions are so, so close to the surface. I would just always feel emotionally rattled, not like myself at all, and often at times would just lose complete touch with who I really feel like I am, which to me it's absolutely awful. A lot of common PMDD experiences that have not been that prevalent for me are even things like panic attacks, extreme rage. A lot of people might also experience suicide ideation. But I find for the most part, my symptoms were more of those kind of like immobilizing, like wanting to make me kind of like go inward, go quiet, as
Yes.
opposed to some of those more activating, mobilizing experiences. There is also like physical components to it. But for me personally, I don't find that they cause me as much havoc as the psychological side of things. Obviously, my physical symptoms are still very much, you're in bed for a couple of days with a hot water bottle, but they don't, it's not something that really disrupts my daily life as much. When I was in my eating disorder and then also the early days of recovery, well before diagnosis, both I would say the emotional and the physical symptoms made recovery so much harder, particularly the shift in motivation. Everything just felt hard, right? The day felt hard, let alone then challenging the eating disorder. That feeling of also feeling out of control would trigger behaviors. So
Mm.
that's when it would get really tricky for me. It's also really common for a lot of people with PMDD and also just general PMS as well to have intense cravings, but to then also have food aversions during that time, which
Interesting.
which would lead me to so much inconsistency in recovery and then also a lot of guilt if I did engage in behaviors. And then you can probably guess the likely pattern was then post that bleed period, restriction would be really prevalent as a result of the overconsumption that I would have had during that time. And this is like well before I had even really figured out what I needed to be doing in recovery, learned some of those foundations, had no idea what was going on in my mental health. I just thought my mental health was super, super inconsistent and would often kind of think like, am I depressed? Like, am I really struggling with anxiety? What is it? But it was really cyclical. So there was actually a couple of weeks of the month where I was feeling pretty fine. So it was really hard to get a diagnosis or even just have any information about what was actually going on. But those weeks sort of in that luteal phase, like after ovulation, before menstruation, would just be so emotionally difficult. There was a very, very significant shift in how I was sort of approaching life and feeling. And I mean, the causes of PMDD are still really unclear, but the widely sort of known assumption is that it is a abnormal reaction to the very normal hormonal changes that happen in that luteal phase,
Right.
which can often then create a huge block to serotonin. Like you have no serotonin, you can't access it at all.
Oh.
So it's really interesting, this whole area, because it is really hard to get a diagnosis. There also isn't that many treatments, right? A way that I have really supported myself through this is has been sort of my own education about it. And that education has had to come from this place of really acknowledging what my own unique needs were. A huge way I support myself is just with the awareness that this is temporary. Every single time it is so temporary. You know, a few days ago, I was my happy self, and I know that that happiness always actually does come back. It also has really forced me to listen to my body more than my mind, right? Which ultimately, if we're looking at positive recovery practices, being able to have that heightened level of attunement to your needs is really, really powerful. So I will often experience this desire to be slow, to be quiet, to do less, to, reduce my output. And I totally honor that.
You are very good at that. I would
I
like, can you bottle
yeah.
that up and send some to me?
I saw this meme this morning, and it was someone's like some meme that said like I can't rest till everything's done, and I was like, I've never related to something less in my life. Like literally never. I mean, I think there was years where I really did push my body past its limits for
Mm.
sure, which ultimately just made things harder. I've tried a few things to manage it, including intermittent dosing. So what that is actually using SSRIs for part of the month to give me some extra serotonin during that luteal phase. But like any SSRI journey, it's a journey, right? And there's how it works, because I was really confused about this when I first sort of was reading some of the information that SSRIs could help for part of the month. Because, we all kind of have this understanding that SSRIs take, 4 to 6 weeks to actually work, and there can be a lot of side effects coming on, coming off, etc. So the idea of just taking it for like 2 weeks of the month seemed like maybe it would create more chaos. But during that time when you're going through that natural hormonal shift, they're actually working in a different way. So they become a lot more fast acting.
Right.
So that's why you can kind of just intermittent dose it there. But I've actually found the best long-term support for me is just lifestyle.
Yes.
And obviously, part of that is having this heightened awareness of my mental health during that time. Like, I'm doubling down on positive self talk, self care, and a lot of those real perspective reminders. I think it's easy when you're in that state to get attached to like sharp mental stories and emotions. It's almost like your mind is trying to find things to upset you.
Mhm.
So I really work hard to counter this and, still ensuring I'm getting out in the world, even if that's literally just going for a coffee. I am also very grateful for the cyclical nature of it, because it forces me to pay attention to the natural shifts in my inner world. Like, this is the thing, being a menstruating woman, if you are a menstruating woman, you're gonna have really four distinct different emotional states of the month. And I have to be really in tune with that, right? So I know what's going on in my body, which is great, right? I also kind of use that opportunity as great space for emotional release, right? I really appreciate a good cry. It's this
Mhm.
opportunity for recalibration, for reflection, and just to really focus on my emotional world. It's kind of like my body is telling me it's time to go quiet. Let's just like close everything down from the external and really focus on the internal and do some of this work.
Yes.
So through doing that, I think I've kind of shifted my perspective from almost like fearing that time to really being able to embrace it. Because this is the thing, like with any illness or particularly like chronic diagnoses as well, the resistance to like the hand of cards that we've been given just causes so much suffering.
Yes.
And I think like there's a situation, and there's going to be your response to the situation, right? And I acknowledge that is such a hard lesson to learn, and it's one that I have grappled with at so many different points, right? But also after having an eating disorder, one thing I know for sure of many things is that I don't want to be at war with myself, right? And that means accepting what I can't change, which is this diagnosis and my situation, and then committing to change what I actually can, right? Even if I obviously, if I had had an earlier diagnosis for PMDD, it probably would have made I would say maybe my recovery even a little bit quicker, because I just would have actually been able to manage this as well and understand what was going on. But that's not what happened, right? And that's also okay. And I feel actually quite accepting of that.
Yeah, and it would have been like you probably would have attributed some of the stuff that you were feeling and experiencing in recovery to recovery when it
Mm.
was likely like some of this as well. It would have been really, really there would have been such a mystery as to like what do I attribute this to? And when you're in such a difficult process that is already so deeply emotional and raw and brings you down to your foundations, it's like, which one is it? Is it this deeply,
Totally.
aligning but very, very at times distressing process I'm in, or is it this thing that I don't even know I have yet?
Absolutely. And you can just see, I totally understand when people sort of feel at a loss and they're like, say they're in the early days of recovery, maybe they struggle with this, maybe they don't. But that feeling of feeling like my period just makes it so much harder and it like makes recovery impossible. The good work
Yes.
that I've been doing, I just feel like I've then dug myself into a hole for 2 weeks. I spent 2 weeks digging myself out of the hole to fall back into the hole. Totally get that, sis.
Yeah.
But there is absolutely ways to manage this. And I feel like awareness is the first piece of it.
Completely. It's sort of same back this way with me, same kind of questions like how was my eating disorder recovery impacted by endo? What is life like now? So I didn't get my diagnosis until I was 30, I think.
Mm,
And I went to recovery when I was 25. So I was really solidly recovered by then. But like you, have had this, I would say, since, probably shortly after I started menstruating, because I had extremely heavy periods when I first got my period, which tapered off over time. And then other symptoms started to kick in, like the pain. And I'd go to mum and be like, Mum, I'm in so much pain. Like, I can't go to school. And she'd be like, we all get period pain. We all get bad period pain sometimes. Like, you still need to go to school. And like you, when people frame it as like it's just bad PMS, people saying it's just a bad period. No,
mm, mm,
it is not just a bad period. If you speak to some women who have, like I do, stage 4 endo and have also given birth to children,
mm.
they will say that sometimes their endo pain is worse than being in labor. Like
Insane.
I will be sitting talking to my mum and I will be like on my second day of my period is the worst and I will be gripping onto the armchairs and I will have to take breaks between talking and mum's like they look like contractions. That's what I had. That's how I experienced it, not being able to talk, holding on, holding on, holding on, waiting for it to pass and then the wave goes and then it comes back again. So it is not just a bad period. It is not just, maybe if really bad period pain is a 10, this is an 11, this is like an 100.
Mm,
And because I have stage 4, there are different stages of endometriosis, and you can have stage 4 and not get any symptoms, but you can still have all of the internal stuff happening with endometriosis, which is at its core the lining of the uterus, that material grows outside of the uterus and it just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. You can also end up with endometriomas, which are this is a bit graphic for everyone, but they're called chocolate cysts. So they're cysts on your ovaries that are filled with old blood and some of this old tissue. I have one on each ovary, and they're like they get up to like 7 or 8 centimeters. They're really, really big and they grow very quickly. I have what's called kissing ovaries. So my ovaries are now connected to each other with those cysts connected to them. So there's a lot happening biology wise. I also have it growing on my diaphragm, which means I get pain in my shoulders. I get
mm,
nerve pain in my left hip. So it becomes very, very complicated as this thing kind of progresses with time. It's an average of about 7 years for women to be diagnosed, which, much like PMDD, just speaks to how impossible it is for women to access a diagnosis and then ongoing care. Because, much like PMDD, we know a little about endo, we don't know an awful lot, even though more than 1 in 10 Australian women have endometriosis.
mm,
So you can have endo at any stage and be suffering from a range of symptoms. It's not like stage 1 is a walk in the park for people, just like with stage 4. Some people can have all the internal biology I have and no pain, and they would never know it. It
mm,
can impact fertility, and it has all of these knock on effects. And it's really disruptive. It's hugely disruptive in that it is really unpredictable. I have it down to something that's a bit more predictable, which is I know that the early stages of my period are hell. They are just like 24 hours of gripping pain. Um, but the nerve pain for me is very, very unpredictable. And particularly with something
mm,
at the moment where I will sit at a certain angle and I can feel something pinching with my left ovary. And I have to be so careful with that because that can lead to a cyst bursting and really rupturing something inside, or ovarian torsion, which is when your ovary starts to twist on itself and starts to kind of go into necrosis, which means that you can then go into sepsis. So
yeah.
it's a lot. It's a lot. And for me, it was such a challenge of finding the right balance of how to support myself because old school medical frameworks like, oh, you're in pain, here's a bunch of painkillers, here's a bunch of codeine, endone, etc., which then starts to stuff up your digestive system, which then starts to inflame that area even more. The thing that has changed my life is about 18 months ago, I started trying medical marijuana in oil form, and it has changed my whole life. I think it's a huge contributor to how I've been able to get it down to a bit more of a predictable pattern with that, what is like the more period pain kind of pain, not the nerve pain. It also helps me to sleep better, which helps me to regulate this a little bit more. It obviously helps with overall anxiety. I also have CPTSD, so it has that benefit as well. I caution people to obviously go into this with their own, medical advice and explore their own options. None of this is medical advice. It is also quite expensive. It's something that I have carved into just a non-negotiable for me. I will give up most everything else so I can access this kind of care. Um, and the next step for me is likely going to be that I'm going to be having a hysterectomy probably in the next year or two,
Mhm.
which, like, these are the extreme things that we need to do to just try to get some relief, because it doesn't even
Mhm.
sure that that's going to fix it. There is no cure or fix. So people will be told myths like have a hysterectomy. For some people, it will work. For some, it won't.
Mhm.
Have a baby. Women are told have a baby to cure your endo. So you might just end up with severe endo and a baby who you really struggle to take care of because you have no energy and you're in pain constantly, which is really strange that is offered as a cure to a really severe medical issue. Um, and like you, it has become, I've gone through these stages of real resistance and resentment, and then more acceptance, and now trying to come to peace with it.
Mhm.
I think it
Mhm.
really impacted my eating disorder in that endo changes the shape of your body. I've always had this
Yeah.
protruding part of my lower belly, which always really bothered me, not realizing that's endo. Endo belly is a thing. If you Google it, they all look very, very similar. I love my little endo belly now. Like, it's one of those things, like, just sitting and I'll just be like, oh, this little comforting little pouch. So all the physical signs were there, but it was a real distressing point for my eating disorder because it didn't matter what I did, I couldn't get rid
Yeah.
of the endo belly, but I didn't know what it was. And it was my
Mhm.
body trying to say, like, I need you to take care of me and not be my enemy and reject me and, make this harder. So the
Mhm.
physical shape of my body and the way that I retain fluid was highly distressing to me in my eating
Yeah.
disorder. And that's why a big part of my even early days of recovery were
Mm.
about finding avenues to being able to get back on the same page with my body. I also, because of my eating
Really.
disorder, ended up with rosacea, which is a skin condition. And once I went into recovery and stopped using certain behaviors, that really started to clear up quite quickly. And I was like, how cool that my body is like able to start repairing that quickly. So
Yeah.
then when I found out about my endo diagnosis, I felt like I was in a good spot to be like, it's the same thing. Your body, as much as it's inflamed and it's angry and it's hurting and it changes 4 sizes a day sometimes, like if she's got backup pants on backup pants of all different sizes, it is essentially a signal that my body, with what it was given genetically that it didn't choose, it's doing its best. It really, really is. So I think it actually has aided in my recovery and now being a recovered person. It's actually one of the avenues where I can find the most compassion for my body, where I'm like,
Mm.
doing your best, girlfriend. And like, I've got to do my best, which I am working on all the time to
Mhm.
give it the opportunity to, like, for us to be on the same side.
Absolutely. And I think your journey is so powerful as well. This all these conversations around health and eating disorders, I feel like something that is just so important here is this conversation around like accepting your body, working with, not against it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like these are just experiences that we actually have to go through. And it's like how you do what you do with your hand of cards. Like this is what's going to make your life a lot more joyful and actually really help you understand what do you need to do to actually reach a level of well-being, not just recover from your eating disorder, but ongoing, consistent, non-negotiables that are going to help you keep your head above water and actually help you be swimming through life. I'm
Yes.
really curious, Mel. Obviously, hysterectomy is the best decision for you, but say, there was someone who was in recovery but and had endo and had a desire to have children.
Yeah.
What are sort of the like extra maybe complications or like barriers and hurdles that they may have? Like what does it look like for someone if they were trying to fall pregnant and they had
Great. Great question. I went through a process, and I just put out a podcast episode about this, about making the choice to stay child free and how I came to that conclusion, because I never wanted children. And then I went through a lot of loss. I lost half of my close family members very quickly, and suddenly I wanted a kid. That was my trauma brain. And once I went through EMDR, etc., I then started thinking about having a child and I was panicking and I was like, maybe this isn't actually what you want. And it isn't for me personally. That's my choice, but any choice is a beautiful one. But in the period where my trauma brain was like, we should have a baby, I went down the path of speaking to fertility specialists, etc. Because once you get diagnosed, everyone is on you about like, do you want to have babies? If you want to have babies, you got to think about having babies. What are the babies? And you're like, I don't even, like 29, turning 30. I'm like, I just want to go out for drinks. Like, leave me alone. I'm thinking about like Friday night. I'm not thinking about like 3 or 4 years from now. And so people start putting it in your head, and then that coincided with a lot of loss. And so I just kind of lost myself for a minute. But I did go down the path of egg freezing. And that, like, what you're told is like that's the insurance policy. Even that isn't a guarantee. But what a lot of the issue is that your ovaries obviously have follicles on them. Follicles are what produces the eggs. And because you have tissue growing on your ovaries, or you have, like I do, endometriomas, they destroy the follicles, right? So your egg production is impacted. So the sooner, if you are somebody who is thinking about having children, you don't have to be certain about it, because I certainly wasn't. Going down the path of egg freezing is a really, really wise move because it is an insurance policy, but it is not a guarantee, because then there can be other complications with your uterus and all kinds of things that can make this additionally complicated.
Yeah.
Depends on your profile. But I recommend all women to think about egg freezing, endo or otherwise, PCOS or otherwise, because there are other things that can make fertility really complicated that you don't find out until you're trying. And
Mm,
by you may not have the egg supply or the opportunity to maybe have that insurance policy. So we know that women are having children later and later, and they're having them on their own, which I think is absolutely bloody amazing. But I just always encourage women to think about their fertility health and that insurance policy. But I didn't go down the path. I made my decision to not have children before I went through the egg freezing process. But it's big. It's IVF. Like, you're giving yourself injections.
huge and financial barriers
Massive.
with
Oh,
IVF. It's
huge.
insane.
If you have endo, I will say the government does subsidize a good portion of the process, particularly if you have severe endo. Like for me, I have endo inside my ovaries as well. It's a real circus in there. And because of that, mine would have been heavily, heavily subsidized. So I
Mm.
will say that, but even then, it is still a pretty major investment.
Yeah, it's huge. I feel like and in any whether it's, extra psychology sessions or extra medical appointments, like the costs add up. It's amazing there is some level of subsidy for sure, but I still feel like even, say it's just someone who just wants to, get eggs checked or eggs frozen. It's a huge, huge financial barrier.
Massive. And I do just want to say before because we have a couple of questions from our listeners, but I do just want to include this as well, which is that this is another reason why kind of the wellness and, health spaces really, really frustrate me. I just want to say to everyone, if you are dealing with a chronic illness, or you are dealing with something like, endo, PMDD, PCOS, whatever it is, I also have psoriatic arthritis. There is a disconnect between who you are up here and who your body allows you to be. And there is so much messaging about like your health is your personal responsibility. And if you aren't a quote unquote healthy person, that is because you have failed or you have made the wrong choices. That is bullshit. Everybody has their own genetic, lottery. And some of these things get triggered and some of them don't. My psoriasis and arthritis got triggered by a moldy apartment. So there are things that you just cannot control. And I think that if we stay stuck in some of that resistance of like, I did the wrong thing, or I'm a bad person, or I made the wrong choices, it can lead to so much more unnecessary illness. So fuck that
Mhm.
messaging.
Absolutely. I think that's such a powerful point because it's so easy unless you kind of have these awareness barriers up that are stopping you from taking in this information to take that as your truth without actually being in the space of figuring out what do I actually want to believe about my own body and my own experience. And just like you're saying, this for you has been a huge avenue of body compassion. And I think with anyone going through recovery, like whether or not you're dealing with something else, body compassion is not a step that can be missed. It is so necessary, informative for recovery, but also just to have a consistent healthy relationship with yourself, how you're speaking to yourself, how you speak to yourself matters. Your body is always listening,
Yeah.
right? working together is the most powerful thing I think that you can do. And also seeking supports. I think it's very easy for people to feel just lost in this world of there's so much going on with my health. I don't know where the fuck to start. Totally get that. I
Yeah.
think even like conversations like this are really useful just to like pull down some of those barriers around like what is actually going on with me. I think I mean, there's so many different areas that come up for people who are struggling with these things, but even people say who have like type 1 or type 2 diabetes, that makes recovery incredibly difficult as well. Like this is just a very small area that people may be struggling with whilst also going through recovery.
Yeah. Beautiful.
What about meal? This is a question that someone asked, which I think a lot of people would really struggle with. How do I force myself to eat when endo slash PCOS bloat is so bad that I feel like I can't do it?
I totally get this. I experience this sometimes. Like I also experience nausea as a symptom, which is why like whole nose, I always have lemonade in the fridge. Always, 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 always. There's always some kind of soft drink in my fridge. Like I have it here right now because I had some breakfast and then I started to feel very, very nauseous. So nausea is also an element as well, which is, I think, to say that I say this all the time, like recovery goes with you wherever you are and whatever is happening, like recovery has to go with you. And I think that can sound like an obligation, but I want you to think about it instead as like a supportive measure for everything, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's just like for your cognitive well-being as you're navigating something that is distressing or uncomfortable, you are being able to eat regularly and adequately is the foundation that everything else sits on. And that's your physical health, that's your mental health, that's your self talk, that's everything, right? Like if we're not eating enough, we're not eating with enough adequacy, variety, regularity, we are going to be experiencing heightened anxiety, discomfort, etc. So it's actually you taking something ironically off the plate from an anxiety and discomfort perspective by putting something on the plate. And I think it's instead of I think language, what you just said is so pertinent here, which is that you are always listening to yourself. Your body is always listening, but you are also always listening to yourself. And so if you use language like, how do I force myself to eat? That's
Mhm.
a really disconnected,
Yeah.
it feels like you're up against something. It feels like it's something to rebel against versus how do I encourage myself? How do I support myself to eat? How, like, whether it's alarms in phones or it's giving yourself permission to go as slow as you need to. I know that eating very slowly can be a behavior, but all these kinds of practices and behaviors come down to intention. If you need to eat slowly and give yourself breaks and introduce a little bit of something fizzy to make it easier, that's okay. If you know that you also use that as a behavior, don't let that then like spill out to other eating events. But if you need to do what you need to do to get through that process, that is okay. But I think certainly the language used of like force, really, really loaded language, trying to soften that up a little bit and get yourself back on the same team with your body.
Absolutely. And I think realistically, whether it's like, really struggling with like endo bloating or just going through sickness or having a stomach bug, whatever it might be, these are actually really useful experiences of exposure to keep your recovery resilient because this is
Yes.
the thing, adequacy and variety, you got to do it. The way in which you do that, maybe you're gonna have to be a bit flexible about that, right? Maybe that looks like having smoothies, right? Having more liquid food if you've got a stomach bug, whatever it
Convenient
might
foods. Yep. Yep.
be, foods like plain foods, etc. Because you still have to do it. And also it's so wise and kind to yourself to know your vulnerabilities. And so often that could be like, oh, eating disorder, sickness, I can just jump in here. No, you need to call
Yes.
it out on the bullshit if anything is kind of coming up that you feel like, oh no, maybe the intention for that was actually a little bit gray.
Yes, I think that also I love to do time traveling with clients where they're like, but right now, I'm like, yes, but do you imagine yourself in 5 or 10 years when you're having a flare up to still be, giving yourself a pass to not eat in a way that is supportive of you? Oh God, no, I would hope I'd, okay, then when does that start? Right. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's not fake it till you make it, but it is a little bit of like, you've got to perform some of this stuff before you know the lines by heart. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is like rehearsal for your recovered self who goes, I'm having an endo flare up. I need to be really supportive of myself. I've got to put on the comfiest clothes, stay away from mirrors, watch things that are comforting, like just be in the little comfort ball that you can create for yourself. And that includes how you interact with food. If you imagine that that's what it would look like in 5 years, you've got to start rehearsing
Yep.
that now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Similar back to you. Question from the people. It feels like PMDD is making it impossible to recover. Any advice?
Firstly, it's not impossible. You just haven't figured out how to do it yet. Um, my advice would be that get really clear on your symptoms, like track them over a few months so you can be really aware of what to expect.
Mhm.
Preventative care is so important here. So that looks like, in those weeks where you're feeling good and, even if just feeling completely like yourself, set up those support structures then. I kind of think about that time as like the training for the actual time when you're not feeling as good, where you may not have as much capacity to do things. So that looks like make sure you are nourishing your body, make sure you are eating enough, make sure you are getting enough sleep, drinking enough water. I often as well will cut things like alcohol and coffee just because they further inflame my body and also make me a bit anxious. So it's like that preventative care of being like, okay, I'm probably going to be feeling a little bit emotionally wobbly. What can I do now, as opposed to just feeling like this is going to be fucking chaos. Like I'm just going to like, making assumptions on how you're going to be able to show up for yourself. Because I think there's a lot of like self-growth that happens from getting through that time and being like, oh, it actually wasn't as bad as last month because of how I showed up for myself. And I think that develops a real strength in yourself. I also would say don't hold back emotion. If you need to cry, have a cry.
Yeah.
There's maybe like a week of that, not a week, maybe like 3 or 4 days of that time where my base state is teary. Like if I call my sister, start crying. If I wake up and I've lost one of my socks, start crying. It's just
Walk into a cobweb.
so, walk into a cobweb, start
Panic attack.
screaming, panic attack, right? And also just being aware if you're also going through recovery, if under eating or overeating is a risk for you, maybe it looks like following more structured eating during that time, but then letting your body be a bit of a guide around food decisions, but still having a bit of a element of structure can be really preventative. Even if someone is kind of at the point in recovery where they don't feel like structured eating is necessary, it's always going to be this safety net, right? It's not forever, but it's also a really mature thing to be like, I'm feeling a little bit more wobbly. I need to have a higher level of accountability. High stress levels, high level of accountability. So there's a lot of lifestyle things that you can kind of throw in there. And I really think through my own symptom management, I do struggle a lot less now, right? It's really only super intense for me, maybe from of my period, like days 25, 26 through to like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Which is a lot more manageable than half my life, right? So I think even just with lifestyle things, that is significantly reduced. So there is a lot of things that you can do for it, but you first of all need to give yourself the time and energy to try to figure out what's going to work for you and what's not.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're talking about is so much of what we teach people and teach our clients in, the coping strategies and coping skills that we help them build in their own personal toolbox, which is cope proactively, not
Yeah.
reactively. Like
Yeah.
eating disorders are such reactive copers. They're not really coping, but they, wait for everything to hit the wall and then they're like, extreme measures that don't actually address the original problem.
There's no other
Activate.
option. Yeah.
Versus like your healthy self, as you say, is doing things like I'm getting to know my patterns, I'm getting to know my cycles, whether that's behavioral or it's something like PMDD or endo, or it's, looking at how your eating disorder responds to stress or just how you respond to stress and anxiety. We do a lot of this at the retreat. Like, let's look at your patterns as a human, not even just your eating disorder patterns, because your eating disorder is just latching onto your human patterns, which might be that you are more highly anxious or that you are somebody who's perfectionistic, or you might have endo or PMDD. So you're still going to have those things when the eating disorder's gone. So let's make sure that we're aware of those things and putting things in place to be able to cope proactively when they kind of get a little bit out of balance, so they don't get so out of balance that we're falling into maladaptive stuff.
Exactly. And I think a lot of that, even baseline preventative work, it's also just general nervous system work, right? Like really be practicing emotionally regulating through the month so you don't feel like, again, there's no other option, as
Yeah.
well as like caring for your body through the month, caring for your emotional state through the month. Because ultimately it's a learning, like often can take years to figure out how to care for ourselves. And also our body's always changing and adapting. So the work doesn't actually end, right? We just have to
Yes.
always be adaptable to it. And I think that's an important thing to remember as well. But for anyone who's struggling with these things out there is absolutely hope. And likely there's a lot more people struggling with the same thing that you're struggling with, but it's just not spoken about that much.
Yeah. And I would just give a couple of suggestions, like practical things, especially if you're in Australia. I'm very fortunate where I've just moved to. There is an endo clinic available to me, which one appointment at the endo clinic was more fulsome and supportive than pretty much everything else I've experienced since I was diagnosed. And we know that the government, depending on who you vote for, make sure you look up what their policies are. I'm not going to endorse anything on this podcast. The other podcast will do that. But um, the government is putting more money into these areas, and we need to support, those policies that will make it easier for people to be able to access these services. Also, some of the stuff you're talking about there with tracking, if you want to start getting more attuned to what is going on, there's really great apps. Like I use Clue, which has like I have a free subscription. I don't pay anything for it, which gives you the option to not just track the heaviness of your flow, but also your emotional state, your tiredness. It is really fulsome. So you can then look at the map and be able to take it to doctors and specialists and be like, here's all the data. So
Yep.
I'll put a couple of those links if you are able to access an endo clinic, or you are, wanting to maybe start tracking. I'll put a couple of those options in the description box across everywhere.
Amazing. I've loved this episode. It's like I said at the end of every episode, but I really have this like this episode.
I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please, as always, let us know your experiences, particularly in this area. I think that just even having an outlet and somewhere to put, those feelings and thoughts down is really, really constructive. So let us know any questions, any suggestions for upcoming episodes. We've got a lovely one that we're recording for you next week. But lovely to see you, Hole.
Lovely to see you, Mel. See you soon, everyone.